Good evening, folks, and welcome back, and Merry Christmas. Throughout 2025, the media in the United States and in South Africa, as well as South African government officials, have been fond of claiming that the issues between South Africa and the United States are a consequence of the presidency of Donald John Trump. Balderdash, poppycock. They're long existing. Also throughout the course of 2025, South African media, U.S. media, and South African politicians continually blame the tensions on Donald Trump and the United States, when in fact, the provocateur has been South Africa and its politicians repeatedly throughout the year. In fact, the U.S. government has been quite restrained in its response to the provocations by South Africa. Let me run through a list of some of the events that occurred this year that have sparked these tensions and ruined this relationship between the United States, not the least of which, as I speak tonight, are Iranian warships participating in BRICS drills with South African naval forces. Imagine that. Here's the first one. President Trump suspends all foreign assistance to South Africa, a consequence of the executive order titled Addressing Egregious Actions of the Republic of South Africa on the 7th of February, 2025. The proximate cause of this suspension of aid is that the United States cannot support the government of South Africa's commission of rights violations in its country or its undermining of United States foreign policy, which poses national security threats to our nation, our allies, our African partners, and our interests. Specifically, the Republic of South Africa recently enacted Expropriation Act 13 of 2024, abrogating private property rights, which of course is a violation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. South Africa has taken aggressive positions towards the United States and its allies, accusing Israel, but not Hamas, of genocide in the International Court of Justice, and reinvigorating its relations with Iran to develop commercial, military, and most alarmingly, nuclear arrangements. So that was the suspension of foreign aid. Of course, that's all been tied to the so-called white genocide myth that the media keep throwing about. And they asked Trump about that throughout the year, and he responded to the question of white genocide. Then they threw it back in his face, claiming he was running around saying white genocide, which until late in 2025 is a term that he didn't really embrace. Now, the next issue came shortly afterwards, the expulsion of South Africa's ambassador, Ebrahim Rasool, who had previously been the ambassador to the United States and had served in that position, knowing full well the responsibilities of an accredited diplomat. Yet he went beyond the pale. South Africa's ambassador Ebrahim Rasool declared persona non grata on the 14th of March 2025. Secretary of State Rubio said that Rasool was no longer welcome in our great country. The proximate cause of this, Ebrahim Rasool made comments during an online seminar in March of 2025 where he was quoted as saying that Donald Trump was leading a white supremacist movement. Specifically, Rasool stated that Trump was leading a white supremacist movement. He asserted that the MAGA movement was a white supremacist response to growing demographic diversity in the United States, and that Trump was mobilizing supremacism to project white victimhood as a dog whistle during the 2024 elections. None of that is grounded in fact or reality, simply the rantings of a person with extreme bigotry and potentially also racism. So what came next? Well, despite the myths and fairy tales about what the United States has been doing and aggressive action towards South Africa, there was no aggressive action. The latest thing didn't occur until months later because of the G20, refusing to allow South Africa to participate in 2026 G20 events on U.S. soil. That occurred in November of 2025 after the G20 summit. Donald Trump announced that South Africa is barred from the 2026 G20 summit in Miami, and then later announced that they wouldn't be welcome at the first meeting in December on the 15th and 16th of December 2025. The proximate cause of this response, South Africa refused to hand over G20 presidency responsibilities to a senior U.S. embassy representative. Specifically, Ronald Lamola also falsely claimed Donald Trump was a white supremacist on the CNN mockumentary Misinformation, White Genocide from the 16th of November 2025. Ramaphosa repeatedly mocked President Trump and the United States throughout the G20 summit in Johannesburg. South African interlocutors repeatedly shut down U.S. and other G20 member discussions at meetings throughout the year. South African government doxed U.S. G20 negotiators during the course of the year. South Africa perverted the G20 into a developing world beggar's bowl of debt relief and just energy transition handouts. And Ramaphosa and Lamola insulted the United States, calling the president's personal representative a junior official. And what came next? Well, nothing came next. There have been no provocations. There's been no aggression by the United States. All the aggression has come from South African officials who think that it's perfectly fine for them to walk around and mock the American president, mock America, and spew all kinds of nonsense, as well as pal around with evil countries who have malicious intent towards the United States and think that there are no consequences. So let's talk about some of the things that haven't happened in South Africa. For instance, South Africa is not subject to a visa bond. In August this year, the State Department announced the visa bond program for countries with large numbers or percentages of overstays. In other words, people who illegally stayed in America beyond their visa. Some countries, the number is quite egregious. Others are now being punished for a very small number of people doing it, but a high percentage. Let's take a look at these countries. Most of the countries are actually in Africa. Only 2 are outside of Africa. But let's take a look at the countries in Africa that have been hit with this. So Botswana, the Central African Republic, Guinea, Guinea-Bissau, Namibia, Mauritania, Sao Tome and Principe, Tanzania, the Gambia, Malawi, and Zambia. The first ones were, of course, Malawi and Zambia back in August, but now Botswana has been added to the list, as well as Guinea, Guinea-Bissau, and Namibia for the 1st of January. What gives? Why are these countries on the list and not South Africa? If the U.S. is being aggressive towards South Africa, would it have put South Africa on this list, forcing South Africans to deposit $5,000, $10,000, or $15,000 assurance every time they wanted a visa? But South Africa hasn't had that restriction put on them. Yet neighboring Botswana has. Let's take a look at the numbers and see if this is warranted. So here you can see fiscal year 2024, which the date is based upon. 2 countries in yellow are not involved in the visa bond program, Angola and South Africa, at least for the moment. And it's strange that Angola's not on there with 554 overstays. That's 14.5% rate. But that's because Angola and the U.S. are working very closely together, and they've given them a free pass. But Botswana, with just 146 overstays, nonetheless 7%, is now paying the price. The Central African Republic, with only 137 visitors to the United States in fiscal year 2024, had 2 overstays with just 1.46%. And they are now on this list. Yet South Africa, the country with the highest aggregate number from this list in Africa, with 1,391 overstays, in other words, criminal alien invaders who remained in America beyond their authorized visa limit, that's 1.2%, but the highest aggregate number. If the United States was intentionally targeting South Africa, then South Africa would be forced to have the visa bond program. But somehow, that hasn't happened. Once again, proving the poppycock that the United States is targeting South Africa. The next story is the whining and the constant, Peter Bruce and others in South Africa, whining that the United States has put tariffs on South Africa. No, Karen. The tariffs have been put on 90 countries that have been unfair to the U.S. in their trade practices. South Africa imposes 75% tariffs on our poultry imports. They ban our pork imports. They put quotas on our automobiles while getting duty-free access to our marketplace. That's hardly reciprocity. As a consequence, they've been hit with a 30% tariff. But they act like they were the only ones targeted. Oh, woe is me. No, South Africa is not targeted. In fact, countries that did get high tariffs that have actually negotiated with the United States, unlike South Africa, have had their tariffs lowered. Bangladesh had a 37% rate, higher than South Africa. They've got adjusted down to 20%. Cambodia had a 49% rate. They negotiated with the United States and allowed our products in. Now it's at 19%. China at 84% at its peak, back down to 30%. India at 50%, back down to 25%. Switzerland with 39%. Switzerland, a very friendly country with the U.S., but banned our products for the most part, wouldn't let our products in the country. They do now, lowered from 39 to 15%, and Vietnam from 46 to 20%. But look at South Africa. No genuine effort to negotiate the trade tariffs, yet they want to complain and they want to play the martyr and the victim that they're the ones being targeted, when in fact South Africa is not being targeted. It's utter poppycock. If South Africa was being targeted, those tariffs would be 50% or higher, or we'd simply ban your products. So let's talk about some of the things the United States has not done. If there was genuinely a war between the United States and South Africa, if we generally had such bad relations and the U.S. did not want to improve relations with South Africa, there's a lot of things that could be done in South Africa that would be very harmful, none of which have been done. Let's take a look at this list. Actions the U.S. government is not taking. The SWIFT banking system, banning U.S. companies from doing business in South Africa, undermining the rand, economic sanctions, travel bans, punitive tariffs. 30% is not punitive. 90% is punitive. Export quotas, disrupting the South African bond market, delisting South African companies from U.S. exchanges, targeted travel bans or economic sanctions on officials, embargoing South African goods and services, blockading South Africa, which of course will be an act of war, UN Security Council resolutions. We haven't sponsored any resolutions against the government of South Africa for its rogue actions in allowing the arming of Libyan warlords with helicopters, or shipping mercenaries to fight in Russian forces in an illegal war, or violating the Universal Declaration of Human Rights with the expropriation without compensation. None of these actions have been taken by the U.S. government, not a single one. Yet the South African government and its corrupt media continue to cry every day that the United States is targeting South Africa. You want to get targeted? Take a look at this list. There are some things you get targeted. No, virtually nothing's been done. All the actions the United States have taken have been in response to provocations by the government of South Africa. Quite frankly, if the United States didn't respond, they would look foolish. But of course, that's how the United States has behaved for the past 30 years, letting the ANC get away with all kinds of reprehensible behavior internationally, undermining our interests and our national security, and those of our friends, partners, and allies. But there's a new sheriff in town, and apparently the ANC cannot adapt to this. Ladies and gentlemen, the United States is not at war. with South Africa. The United States does not want a bad relationship with South Africa. The Trump administration does not want a bad relationship with South Africa. The Trump administration wants to do business. The Trump administration would love to do business with South African firms and love to create jobs in South Africa and in America. But the ANC is not interested in that. And they control foreign policy, as they've made clear. Why not? Why do they want to be friends with Tehran? What's that all about? What has Tehran done for South Africans? Not a damn thing. Not a damn thing. What say you, South Africa, Mzansi? You agree? Do you have a different view? Cheers.